Namibia was one of the many nations who faced colonialism in Africa, and is one of the most recent nations that have gotten independence on the continent, gaining said independence from South Africa. As is typical for you curious lot, you might now start to wonder, why was Namibia under control of the South Africans? So to start, the region that makes up modern day Namibia wasn't always called Namibia. In fact, during the colonial period, it was given the very creative name of Southwest Africa, northwest of South Africa. The region was also under control of the Germans during the scramble for Africa, but it didn't stay German for too long, since the British and South Africans invaded it during World War I, with the South Africans kicking Germany's arse and occupying Southwest Africa from here on out. The ownership of Southwest Africa was fully validated by the League of Nations in 1920 in the form of a mandate. These were being dished out to all the former colonies of the losers in World War I. South Africa was rewarded this territory and was able to administrate the region, which allowed them to pretty much do whatever they wanted, but it mostly involved racial oppression, apartheid, so on and so forth. Southwest Africa stayed as part of South Africa from this time up until 1990, enduring whatever South Africa was cooking up and having to take it. There were many instances during this time that South African rule in Southwest Africa came into question in the later half of its rule internationally. With the end of World War II, when the League of Nations came crashing down and got replaced with the new and barely improved United Nations, South Africa struck a light bulb idea and saw this as a chance to take authority in Southwest Africa one step further, and requested for the United Nations to let them officially incorporate the land into its territory. But the UN said no. The UN then tried to get South Africa to join the UN Trusteeship Agreement, which would see the lands transformed into the interests that suit best for the residents. You know, something good. South Africa said no. The UN didn't do anything about the rejection and let South Africa still control the region, but told them they still had to adhere to the mandate rules they were given. This meant that South Africa's rule over Southwest Africa was pretty much left unchanged, and a little while after that, South Africa decided to give representation to those living in Southwest Africa in the South African government, in a way to try to bring the territory closer to a total South African control. Hey, that doesn't sound so bad, giving representation to your mandate. I wonder which members of society were given the chance of that representation. Oh. It wouldn't be until 1966 that the UN began to care about Southwest Africa again, terminating its mandate status and forfeiting South Africa's administration powers in the territory. Also, since around this time as well, the Namibian War of Independence began, which just gave the UN even more reason to pressure South Africa to leave Southwest Africa. To further challenge South Africa's rule, the International Court of Justice called South Africa's presence in the region illegal and was demanded to leave the area yet again. Obviously, being only a verbal demand, it can be easily ignored, and that's exactly what South Africa did. With more international representation and support for Namibia getting ever so high, everyone was just waiting for South Africa to finally cave in and concede with UN demands. They finally conceded in 1988, and a ceasefire was made between South Africa and the independence fighters, which allowed for a peace process between the two to be monitored by the UN. The ceasefire was broken months later in March 1989 due to a misunderstanding on the independence fighters' side, but a new one was put in place shortly after this minor oopsie. The process was finally completed a year later, with South Africa fully leaving the territory, and for the first time ever, Namibians held their first fair and free election in February 1990. With the main independence movement party taking power, and the country had officially been declared independent on the 21st of March 1990, ending 75 years of control from South Africa and putting a new nation on the globe. A few pieces of land owned by South Africa were later transferred to Namibia in 1994. And with that brings us to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.